Billionaire CEO Daniel Carter fired his janitor without hesitation. One mistake, one warning ignored, one order given. The security note was signed. The badge was taken. The door was closed. Everyone froze. The janitor, Michael Reed, didn't beg. He didn't argue. He only nodded once, held his worn jacket tighter, and walked out of the tallest building in the city. A man who cleaned marble floors for years was erased in less than a minute. But the shock didn't end there. Less than an hour later, Daniel's phone rang again. Not from the office. Not from his board. Not from another millionaire or rival CEO. It was from a place he never expected to hear from. His face changed. The billionaire who controlled markets suddenly couldn't control his own breath. Because the janitor he just fired wasn't just a worker. He was a father. And his son was connected to Daniel in a way that would destroy everything he thought he knew. Daniel stood still, staring at the glass walls of his empire, realizing the truth was already moving toward him, and there was no way to stop it. As a billionaire CEO, he woke before sunrise in his Manhattan penthouse, reviewed global numbers while the city slept, and spoke in short, sharp sentences that moved millions of dollars. His apartment was silent, spotless, and expensive, glass walls, cold steel, and lights that never felt warm. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt empty. The only sound that ever broke the silence came from his young son, Noah. Noah was 8 years old, quiet, thoughtful, too careful for his age. He walked softly through the penthouse, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Daniel loved his son, but love came to him like a task on a checklist. School fees paid, toys bought, the best doctors on call. What Daniel didn't know how to give was time. Noah's mother was gone. Her absence hung in the air like a question Daniel refused to answer. Every morning, before Noah left for school, one person always spoke to him kindly. That person was Michael Reed, the janitor. Michael worked the night shift at Daniel's company tower. He cleaned offices long after executives went home. He wiped fingerprints off glass walls and polished floors that reflected power he would never touch. His back ached. His hands were cracked. His jacket was old. But he always smiled when Noah appeared in the lobby with his backpack dragging behind him. "Morning, champ," Michael would say softly. Noah always smiled back. Michael lived in a small apartment across the river in New Jersey. No luxury. No safety net. Just unpaid medical bills, instant noodles, and a phone that never stopped reminding him of what he couldn't afford. He worked 2 jobs when his body allowed it. Every dollar had a purpose. None were wasted. Still, every night before work, Michael stopped by a corner store and bought something small, a candy bar, a toy car, a notebook. He never gave them directly. He left them where Noah would accidentally find them. Michael called them promises. At Noah's school, Grace Carter, his teacher, noticed things others missed. Noah rarely talked about his father. He drew the same picture over and over, a lighthouse standing alone in the dark, with a small figure waiting at the bottom. Grace asked gently once what it meant. Noah only said, "It helps people find their way back." Grace felt a knot form in her chest. That same week, Daniel's patience ran thin. A deal collapsed. A rival embarrassed him. Pressure closed in. When he walked into the lobby and saw Michael standing where he shouldn't be, Daniel didn't see years of loyalty. He saw a problem. The firing was quick, cold, public. Michael said nothing. But later that night, as Noah sat on his bed clutching a small lighthouse keychain, Grace made a call she wasn't sure she should make. "Mr. Carter," she said carefully, "your son is asking about someone you just sent away." Daniel almost ignored it. Almost. Because at that exact moment, he noticed something strange. The lighthouse keychain in Noah's hand looked painfully familiar, and Daniel suddenly remembered a promise he never kept. And far below his penthouse, in the freezing dark, Michael Reed was walking home, unaware that the truth he carried was about to collide with Daniel's world in the most devastating way possible. The lighthouse keychain sat on his desk, catching the city light from the window. He turned it over again and again, trying to remember where he had seen it before. The harder he tried, the more his chest tightened. Memories hovered just out of reach, like names forgotten on purpose. In the morning, Noah refused breakfast. "I want to see Michael." the boy said quietly, eyes fixed on the table. Daniel snapped before he could stop himself. That's not happening. Noah's shoulders stiffened. His breathing grew fast, uneven. He pressed his palms against his chest like he was holding something in place. Daniel froze. He had seen this once before. At a hospital. Years ago. Grace arrived within minutes. Called by the house staff, Daniel barely noticed anymore. She knelt in front of Noah, spoke softly, helped him breathe. When Noah finally calmed, he didn't look at his father. He only whispered, he promised. Daniel swallowed. Promised what? Noah shook his head. He said it was for later. Later. Daniel stepped into the hallway and called security, then stopped himself. Instead, he grabbed his coat. Where does he live? He asked Grace. The diner smelled like coffee and fried onions. It was the kind of place Daniel had driven past his entire life without ever entering. Michael Reed sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. His jacket was damp from melting snow. When Daniel walked in, conversations dipped. People noticed power, even when it wore a simple coat. Michael stood halfway, then stopped. Sir, Daniel gestured to the seat across from him. Sit. Michael did. Silence stretched. The clink of dishes. A waitress refilling cups. You shouldn't have talked to my son, Daniel said. Michael didn't argue. He talked to me. Daniel tightened his jaw. Why? Michael looked down at his hands. Because no one else was listening. Daniel leaned back. You crossed the line. Yes, Michael said. But I'd do it again. That answer hit harder than an apology. Daniel noticed a folded envelope on the table, worn thin at the edges. His name was written on it. His full name. What's that? Daniel asked. Michael slid it back, toward himself. Not for today. Daniel's voice dropped. You don't get to decide that. Michael finally met his eyes. There was fear there, but also something else. Resolve. If you read it too early, Michael said quietly, you'll hate me. Or yourself. Maybe both. Daniel's fingers curled. He reached for the envelope anyway. At that moment, the diner door opened. Noah stood there with Grace, breathless from rushing. The boy's face lit up when he saw Michael. He ran, nearly tripping, and wrapped his arms around the janitor's waist. Michael's eyes filled. He held Noah gently, like something precious and breakable. Daniel watched. Something twisted in his chest. Jealousy, confusion, shame. Noah pulled back and held up the lighthouse keychain. You forgot this. Michael smiled. Guess I needed you to remind me. Daniel's head pounded. Why does my son have that? Michael opened his mouth, then stopped. Because, Grace said softly from behind Daniel, it belongs to someone who mattered. Daniel turned. You knew. Grace nodded. Not everything. Just enough to know this wasn't random. Michael stood slowly. I should go. Daniel blocked his path. You're not going anywhere. Michael's voice trembled for the first time. I don't have much, Mr. Carter. But I have promises. Please don't make me break another. Daniel stared at the envelope still on the table. His name, his past, his son standing between them. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel picked up the envelope. And for the first time since becoming a billionaire, he was afraid of the truth waiting inside. Daniel Carter left the diner with the envelope still unopened. It burned in the pocket of his coat like a warning he refused to read. For the rest of the day, Daniel tried to return to control, calls, meetings, numbers on screens, but nothing held. Every sentence blurred into noise. Every pause filled with Noah's voice. He promised. The words followed him into elevators, into silent hallways, into the echoing space of his own thoughts. That evening, Noah barely spoke. He lined his toy cars in perfect rows, then knocked them over and started again. Grace sat nearby, watching quietly. He does this when he's afraid, she said. Daniel didn't look up. Afraid of what? Grace chose her words carefully. Of being left. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm not leaving him. Grace met his eyes. Children don't hear intentions. They feel patterns. The words landed deeper than Daniel expected. Later that night, when Noah finally slept, Daniel stood alone in the penthouse, city lights flickering like distant stars. He pulled the envelope out and placed it on the counter. His name stared back at him. Not printed. Handwritten. Shaky, careful, personal. He didn't open it. Instead, he poured a drink and stared out the window, memories forcing their way through cracks he had sealed years ago. A hospital hallway. A ringing phone he ignored. A woman's voice, tired but hopeful, asking him to come home early just this once. Daniel closed his eyes hard. He didn't sleep. The next morning, Daniel made a decision that shocked everyone, including himself. He went to New Jersey. Michael's apartment building was old, brick chipped by time and weather. The stairwell smelled of cleaning solution and damp clothes. Daniel climbed the stairs slowly, each step pulling him farther from the world he controlled and closer to one he didn't understand. Michael answered the door, looking surprised and immediately concerned. "Is Noah okay?" Daniel nodded. "He's fine." Michael relaxed slightly, then noticed the tension in Daniel's face. "You didn't read it," he said. Daniel stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The apartment was small. Clean. Too clean. A single couch. A folding table. A wall calendar with dates circled in red. On the fridge, a child's drawing of a lighthouse held up by a magnet. Daniel stared at it. "He draws these all the time." Michael swallowed. "She used to draw them too." Daniel turned sharply. "You keep saying she." Michael sat down slowly, like his legs suddenly couldn't hold him. "Because if I say her name, you'll shut down." Daniel didn't deny it. Michael gestured to the envelope in Daniel's hand. "That letter isn't about blame. It's about truth and timing." Daniel's voice dropped. "Why now?" Michael met his gaze. "Because Noah is starting to ask the questions you never answered." Silence filled the room. Daniel finally spoke. "You said you promised her something." Michael nodded. "I promised I'd protect him, even if it meant staying invisible." Daniel laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You think cleaning my floors is protection?" Michael didn't flinch. "I think being there when he drops his backpack is protection. I think listening when he talks about nightmares is protection. I think loving a child when his father doesn't know how is protection." The words hit like a blow. Daniel stood abruptly. "You're out of line." "Yes," Michael said softly, "but I'm not wrong." Daniel turned toward the door, anger rising to drown the ache in his chest. "This ends now." Michael stood too. "Then read the letter." Daniel paused. Michael continued, voice shaking. "Because if you don't, the next truth won't come gently." The call came that afternoon. Grace's voice was tight. "Daniel, Noah didn't come out of class." Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. "What do you mean? He was here. Then he wasn't." The security footage shows him leaving the building with someone he thought he knew. The CEO panicked. Daniel was already in his car before the call ended. His hands shook on the steering wheel as fear cut through every layer of control he had built over his life. Minutes stretched like hours. His mind raced through every possibility, every mistake. Then another call, from an unknown number. "Mr. Carter," Michael said, breathless. "I found him." Daniel exhaled so hard it hurt. "Where?" "Near the old transit bridge." He was waiting. "For what?" Daniel asked, dread creeping in. Michael hesitated. "For you." Daniel arrived to flashing lights and cold wind. Noah sat on the curb, wrapped in Michael's jacket, eyes red from crying. When he saw his father, he didn't run. He didn't smile. He just watched, guarded. Daniel knelt in front of him. "I'm here." Noah whispered, "You didn't come last time." The words cut deeper than any accusation. Daniel reached for Noah, but the boy leaned into Michael instead. And in that moment, Daniel understood something terrifying. Whatever truth lived inside that envelope, it was already shaping his son's heart. Daniel looked at Michael, then at Noah, then down at the unopened letter in his shaking hands. He knew he couldn't run anymore, and he knew that once he opened it, nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and cold fear. Daniel Carter stood frozen as doctors moved around Noah with quiet urgency. Monitors beeped in sharp, steady rhythms that felt louder than sirens. The boy lay small and pale on the bed, his hand curled tightly around the lighthouse keychain like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Michael stood a few steps back, his jacket still wrapped around Noah's shoulders, his face tight with worry he wasn't trying to hide anymore. Grace watched Daniel closely. "This isn't a panic attack," she said softly. It's physical. He's been hiding symptoms for a while. Daniel's voice came out rough. Symptoms of what? No one answered him right away. A doctor finally turned. Your son has a condition that should have been monitored years ago. Stress makes it worse. Fear makes it dangerous. Daniel felt the floor tilt beneath him. Years ago, he repeated. That's not possible. He's had the best care. The best. Money, the doctor finished gently. But not the right information. The words landed hard. Daniel turned to Michael. You knew. Michael nodded once. Not everything, but enough to know he needed calm. Safety. Someone who stayed. Daniel's chest tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Michael's eyes filled. I tried. Daniel pulled the envelope from his coat with shaking hands. Then tell me now. Michael shook his head. Not me. Her. Daniel's fingers trembled as he opened the envelope for the first time. Inside was a letter, folded carefully. Beneath it, a faded hospital bracelet. And a photograph, creased, old, unmistakable. A younger Daniel stood beside Noah's mother outside the same hospital, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Daniel's breath caught. He unfolded the letter. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't wait any longer. I didn't want to burden you. I knew how much the company needed you. I kept telling myself there would be time. Michael knows everything. He was there when you weren't. I asked him to watch over our son if I couldn't. I asked him because he listens. Please don't hate him for loving Noah when you didn't know how. And please, don't wait too long to choose your child. Daniel's vision blurred. The words swam as memories rushed back. Missed calls, canceled visits, promises postponed. He dropped into a chair as if his legs had given up. Noah stirred, eyes fluttering open. Dad, he whispered. Daniel moved instantly, kneeling beside the bed. I'm here. I'm here. Noah looked past him at Michael. Fear filled his eyes. You're not sending him away, right? Daniel swallowed. No. Noah's lip trembled. He stayed with me when Mom couldn't breathe. He stayed when I was scared. Please. His voice cracked, small and desperate. Please don't take him away. If he leaves, I'll be alone again. The words shattered something deep inside Daniel. Michael turned away, shoulders shaking. Daniel reached for Noah's hand. You're not alone. I was wrong. I didn't see what mattered. Noah's grip tightened. Promise. Daniel hesitated, just for a second. That second was enough. Noah's monitor suddenly screamed. Nurses rushed in. The room filled with motion and commands. Daniel was pushed back as doctors worked fast, focused, silent. Time stretched thin. Daniel stood against the wall, the letter crushed in his fist, watching the two people who loved his son more than anything stand helplessly on opposite sides of the room. He realized then that wealth hadn't protected Noah. Distance had almost destroyed him. A doctor turned toward Daniel at last. We've stabilized him, but this isn't over. Daniel's heart pounded. What do you mean? The doctor hesitated. There's more in his history. Something missing from his records. Daniel looked down at the letter again, at the words he had ignored for years. Outside the room, night pressed against the windows. Daniel knew one thing with terrifying clarity. The truth had only just begun to surface, and whatever came next would force him to face the cost of every choice he had ever made. Daniel Carter stayed in the hospital long after the hallway lights dimmed. The world outside kept moving. Markets opened, deals closed, but none of it reached him. He sat beside Noah's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his son's chest, terrified that if he looked away, something would slip through his fingers again. Michael stood near the window, silent, exhausted. Grace leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly, as if holding herself together. The doctor returned just before dawn. We found the missing records, she said. They were never transferred. Your son was diagnosed early. His mother insisted on a calm environment. Stability. Emotional safety. Stress was the biggest risk. Daniel's throat tightened. And I gave him none of that. The doctor hesitated. He survived because someone protected him. Daniel turned slowly toward Michael. The janitor didn't look proud. He didn't look vindicated. He looked tired, like a man who had carried someone else's weight for too long without being seen. Daniel stood. His voice shook, but he didn't stop himself. You saved my son. Michael shook his head. I kept a promise. Daniel stepped closer. Why didn't you come to me? Demand answers? Demand help. Michael's voice cracked. Because you weren't ready to listen. And because she asked me not to fight you. She believed you'd come back to Noah on your own. Grace looked between them. She trusted the wrong kind of time, she said softly. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he let the truth land without defending himself. Without excuses. Without power. I failed him, Daniel said. And I failed her. No one argued. A nurse entered quietly. He's waking up. Daniel moved instantly. Noah's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then searching. Dad, he whispered. I'm here, Daniel said, gripping his hand. I'm not going anywhere. Noah glanced toward Michael. Fear flickered across his face again. Daniel followed his gaze and did something he had never done before. He reached out to Michael. Please, Daniel said. Stay. Michael froze. I don't need your money. I know, Daniel replied. I need your honesty. Silence filled the room. Michael stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, as if this moment might disappear if he moved too fast. He placed his hand gently on Noah's shoulder. Noah smiled faintly. That smile broke Daniel completely. He bowed his head, shoulders shaking, and cried without hiding it. Not quietly, not with dignity, but openly, like a man whose armor had finally shattered. Grace turned away, giving him that dignity anyway. When Daniel finally looked up, his voice was steadier. I spent my life thinking control was strength. I thought providing meant protecting. I was wrong. Michael listened without interruption. I want you back in Noah's life, Daniel continued. Not as a worker, not as someone hidden in the background. As family. Michael's breath caught. You don't mean that. Daniel met his eyes. I've never meant anything more. Michael hesitated. Years of fear, doubt, and restraint fought inside him. Then he looked at Noah. I'll stay, he said quietly, but on one condition. Name it. You don't disappear again. Daniel nodded. Never. The hospital room felt warmer somehow, like something heavy had lifted. But peace didn't last. Grace's phone buzzed. Her face drained of color. Daniel, there's something else. Daniel's heart tightened. What? The hospital administrator called. Someone from your company requested Noah's medical records last month. They were denied. The request didn't come from you. Daniel went still. Who, he asked. Grace swallowed. Your head of private security. The realization hit hard. Someone had been intercepting information, blocking warnings, managing risk, not to protect Noah, but to protect Daniel's image. Anger flared, sharp and cold. Michael stiffened. That's why messages never reached you. Daniel exhaled slowly, dangerously calm. He thought he was doing his job. Grace shook her head. He was choosing reputation over a child. Daniel stepped away from the bed, his face unreadable. For years, power had answered his every command. Now it demanded something else. Accountability. I need to make a call, Daniel said. Michael watched him closely. This isn't revenge. Daniel paused. No, it's correction. He stepped into the hallway and dialed. The conversation was brief. When Daniel returned, something had changed. Not rage. Resolve. He's gone, Daniel said simply. No announcements. No excuses. Just gone. Michael nodded. Good. Daniel sat back beside Noah. The boy squeezed his hand. You're different, Noah said sleepily. Daniel smiled through tears. I'm learning. Noah yawned. Can we build the lighthouse again? The bigger one. Daniel looked at Michael. Together. Michael nodded. The monitors beeped steadily. Dawn light crept through the window. For the first time, Daniel didn't feel like a billionaire, a CEO, or a powerful man. He felt like a father. But as he stared at the letter once more, one final line caught his eye, something he hadn't noticed before. There's one more truth I couldn't write down. Daniel's heart skipped. He folded the letter slowly, dread settling in his chest. Because some truths, he now knew, arrive only when you think the storm is over. And whatever was coming next would test everything he had just promised. The snow melted from the streets, and light returned to places that had forgotten warmth. Daniel Carter noticed the change not from a boardroom window, but from a park bench where he sat every afternoon, watching his son run without fear. Noah laughed more now. He breathed easier. The doctor said his condition was stable, because stress had finally loosened its grip, because someone was finally listening. Daniel was there every morning. School drop-offs replaced early meetings. Packed lunches replaced assistants' reminders. He learned the names of Noah's classmates. He learned how to wait. And most importantly, he learned how to stay. Michael Reed no longer wore a janitor's uniform. He didn't wear a suit either. He wore something simpler, belonging. Michael helped Noah with homework in the evenings, fixing broken toys with the same patience he once used to clean floors no one noticed. He didn't try to replace anyone. He never crossed lines. He simply stood where he had always stood, between fear and a child who needed safety. Grace visited often. She watched the change with quiet pride, never saying, "I told you so." One afternoon, she handed Daniel a drawing Noah had made at school. It was a lighthouse, but this time it wasn't alone. Two figures stood at the bottom, one tall, one smaller. Their shadows stretched forward, not back. Daniel framed the drawing and placed it beside the letter, the one that had changed everything. The final truth in that letter was never spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. It was the understanding that love delayed can become damage, and love chosen late must work twice as hard. Daniel did exactly that. He shut down a private division of his company, quietly, without headlines, and redirected the funds into a children's health initiative. Not in his name, not for reputation, just help, delivered without cameras. When asked why, he said only one sentence: because some debts aren't paid with money. Michael watched him say it, nodding once. Months later, on a calm evening, Noah finished building the large model lighthouse he had promised himself. It stood proudly on the living room table, painted white and blue, the tiny light at the top glowing softly. He tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Dad!" Daniel knelt. "Yes." Noah held up the lighthouse keychain, the old, scratched one Michael had carried for years. "This one's for you." Daniel hesitated. "That was never mine." Noah smiled. "It is now. You found your way back." Daniel closed his fingers around it, emotion tightening his throat. Michael stood nearby, hands in his pockets, ready to step back as he always did. But Daniel didn't let him. "Stay," Daniel said simply. Michael looked at him, not with doubt this time, but with trust. They stood together as the sun dipped low, light spilling through the windows, painting the room gold. That night, Daniel wrote a letter of his own, not to shareholders, not to the public, but to his son. He wrote about mistakes, about silence, about learning too late, but choosing anyway. At the bottom, he wrote the only judgment that mattered. Power didn't make me a father. Kindness did. The next morning, Daniel walked into his company for the first time in months. Not as a billionaire demanding obedience, not as a CEO chasing control, but as a man who understood the true cost of firing someone without seeing them. The final judgment wasn't delivered by a court, a board, or the world. It was delivered quietly, in a child's steady breath, in a promise kept, and in the simple truth that changed everything. The richest heart in the room once belonged to a janitor, and the bravest man was the one who finally learned to listen.